Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 731 through 733, which will cover manga chapters 788 through 790. And this is it, the final bout between Luffy and Doflamingo. Alright, so synopsis. There's nowhere left to run as the birdcage continues to close while everyone on the island works together to slow down the cage walls as they await Luffy to regain his haki to deliver the promised one-hit KO on Doflamingo. Viola and Rebecca, for their part, confront Doflamingo himself to buy some time, but the situation turns desperate as Doflamingo turns them against each other. Alright, so differences. So, like the past few episodes, I haven't really found any too major differences, but the thing is, these episodes, they add so much padding. It's not like any one significant thing. It's just that they add a lot of extra scenes that don't really necessarily need to be there, just to elongate the time. But yeah, there's two bigger changes that I do want to kind of note. Is first off, there's an added scene of Rebecca running around telling people to head to the plateau. But in the manga, you see her running around, but don't really know why in the manga. She's running around, but the next time you see her, she comes across Viola facing down Doflamingo. And similarly, Viola is all of a sudden in front of Doflamingo. And this is actually a part where adding more context might have actually been better on Oda's part. I mean, you can gather from context what is happening here, but for younger readers, it may have been harder to understand that with time running out and how desperate things are becoming, both of them decided that they wanted to do what they can to help and sought out Doflamingo to help buy time because they couldn't help but just standing on the sidelines, especially for these two with how much pain and suffering he has caused both of them and their families, and especially poor Viola. The second change I wanted to mention is during the final moments where the birdcage is closing in and time is running out just before Luffy goes into Gear 4th for the final time, they had a couple filler scenes of Zoro, Usopp, and Robin willing, Luffy to hurry. But the one that they added for Robin is easily my favorite, and I love its addition. In it, Leo is struggling and worrying that they aren't going to make it, and Robin just calmly and reassuringly says that it's going to be all right. Just believe in Luffy. And I love this scene because Toei absolutely understands Robin's character when they added it. Robin is never going to doubt Luffy and has absolute faith in him because, to her, he has already done the impossible and gave her back almost everything she's ever wanted, especially, looking back at NES Lobby. And so, a lot of these things that seem impossible or like miracles, to Robin, they're nothing because Luffy has already done something unimaginably impossible for her. And so I think in relative terms to her experiences, like this is like a Tuesday, I feel like. And so she obviously believes that Luffy can easily overcome this. Well, maybe not easily, but you know what I'm saying. And then I guess the third change, and I'll get into this a little bit, is the way that the King Kong punch is depicted in the anime. It's definitely stretched beyond what I think is intended, and I'll get into this in the episode itself, but definitely it's a difference, I feel like, from the manga. Alright, so now let's get into the episodes themselves. So we're now moving into the final portion of the Dressrosa fight, and this is some of the best One Piece has ever been up to this point. I feel like it often gets lost just how freaking good this ending to this fight really is. It's amazingly heartfelt, emotional, thrilling, and cathartic as we start with God Usopp with the help of Hack, since Usopp can't seem to move really well all himself anymore. He calls upon the citizens and rallies them to go help push back the birdcage and help in saving their own country. This scene is important because there's a theme in One Piece that's very prevalent throughout the entire series that Ivankov sums up really well during Impel Down when saving Luffy from Magellan's poison. And Boncré at the time pleads with Ivankov to perform a miracle, but Ivankov slaps him instead, saying something to the effect of, "You call me a miracle worker, but I'm no god. I won't waste my time saving fools that won't save themselves. Miracles only happen to those who never give up." And in short, miracles don't just happen out of thin air. They happen because you create the opportunity to make those miracles happen. And each and every Straw Hat knows this all too well. This is something Luffy has lived by this entire series, going all the way back to when he met Kobe. And Luffy didn't initially step in to save Kobe from Alvida until Kobe proved that he was willing to stand up and fight for himself. Only after Kobe stood up to Alvida did Luffy step in and finally help Kobe. But if Kobe didn't step up, that miracle that Luffy steps in might not have happened. Now, I'm not saying that if Kobe hadn't spoken up, that Luffy would have just let Kobe die to Alvida's mace, but Kobe would have remained doomed and would have gone right back to being enslaved, if not by Alvida, by someone else eventually. And you can see this in almost every arc in the Straw Hats, that are they're kind and good people that will go out of their way to help, but they aren't altruistic superheroes that save people for the sake of it. Luffy usually has a reason he steps in and helps them, and it's usually the people themselves. And it can be as simple as you gave him a bento box like Rebecca did in Dressrosa. So it's awesome to see Usopp also follow this, because he himself knows this all too well, as it was Usopp's will to face Captain Kuro and his entire crew by himself that motivated Luffy, Zoro, and Nami to step in and help Usopp save Kaya and Syrup Village. And you can hear it in Usopp's voice how much this irritates him, seeing all these people not standing up for their home, because he had to do the same thing and he was willing to do so. And only then did the miracle of Luffy coming in to helping him. Now, two people that don't have this problem are Viola and Rebecca, as both of them separately find their way to Doflamingo to do whatever they can to help and to face Doflamingo, because they both have very personal grudges against him. In particular, Viola feels a little responsible, having been part of the crew as an executive member, but there's also a somewhat hidden reason why Viola is here to face Doflamingo as well. So you'll notice here that despite a few seconds earlier Doflamingo calls Viola, her real name, but when Violet is said, he goes, either I die or you die. She calls him Dofi, and Doflamingo responds, what a passionate decision, Violet. And a fan in the Volume 83 SBS asked Oda about this distinction and what it meant, and Oda responding with the following quote, she was dashing against the enemy. There is a deep secret setting that I can't tell you about though. I informed the supervisor, or I guess the editor, about it, but since it is a pretty adult part of the story, it remains hidden in the shonen manga, which One Piece is. To all adults, please try to imagine yourself. Dressrosa is truly a passionate country, end quote. So if you read between the lines, it's understood by many that Oda is referring to the fact that there was an element of sort of sexual assault, or at least some sort of coercive nature about their relationship, which is just disgusting and makes Doflamingo even more detestable as a villain, and right on par with his celestial dragon heritage with their desire to take up wife slaves. Basically, I hope Viola gets some good shots in on Doflamingo, because he is a piece of shit that deserves to get his ass beaten right here. It just adds even more to the fuel, to the desire to see this piece of garbage get what he finally deserves. And Viola does put up somewhat of a fight, even though it seems inconceivable that Viola would even be able to even last like a minute against Doflamingo. But it's clearly a case of him toying with Viola to make her suffering even greater, until ultimately he casts Parasite on her and Rebecca, choosing to kill them both in the cruelest way possible by having Rebecca kill her own aunt. And this is especially cruel since we all know that Rebecca worked so hard and endured so much to uphold her pacifist ways to honor her mother, but now she is about to be forced to kill her first person, and that person being her mother, Scarlet's sister, and her aunt, is just too much. By this point, I could not wait to see Luffy just end this guy. And yeah, he is one of the most vile villains in this series yet. Meanwhile, back at the edges of the birdcage, we get another amazing Fujitora moment, and one of my favorites for him, and why I absolutely love this guy. As Fujitora shows up with Zoro and them thinking he's here to interfere and arrest them, but he just pretends he doesn't know who they are and decides to help with the rest of his men also doing the same. And I freaking love this moment so much, because this is how the Marines should be putting their lives and the safety of people first. And when you clearly see the pirates trying to do a good thing, they put their differences aside and leave them alone, or in this case, join and help them. This is what Tashigi did with her sense of justice in Arabasta, and what Kobe is striving for in general with the Marines. And I always get goosebumps when I see this and just want to cheer out loud every time. The amazing thing is that with all of them together, they are able to stop the birdcage, if just for a moment, proving to everyone that it is possible to stop it, or at the very least delay it long enough for Luffy to rest up. And the thing I love about this moment is the symbolism here that pretty much foreshadows how they're going to beat the world government and the celestial dragons. It is that everyone will eventually need to join forces to overcome them. When Riku joins in to help push as well, it finally clicks, like for me at least, that's when it clicked. It's not just the Straw Hats and their allies, it's going to take the help of normal citizens, the Marines, and the Royals, and even everyone in between, all working together as one. And that's why this moment is so amazing and so special, especially in retrospect too. Once we get more context on the wider world of One Piece, Oda is basically telling us what it's going to take to end the entire series on a smaller scale with Dressrosa. And with everyone struggling to hold the birdcage back, and Doflamingo about to have Rebecca kill Viola, Luffy has to hurry, but he still has at least 1 minute left before he supposedly will regain his strength. And with things looking desperate for Viola and Rebecca and no one around to help, even Kuros doesn't know that Rebecca is in trouble because he's also too busy helping push the birdcage back. But one unexpected hero appears to save the day, and it was not someone I don't think anyone had on their bingo card as being one of the MVPs of Dressrosa. And that's Gats, of all people, all of a sudden can be heard across the island on his PA, Denden Mushi, and starts vamping and hyping up Luffy. And what I love about this is everyone is confused as to what the hell this guy is thinking and doing at a time like this. Even as the viewer in the moment, you're thinking he's just trying to hype everyone else up, giving them hope and motivation, as well as explaining to everyone who exactly is helping them. And that's the gladiator Lucy is also actually Straw Hat Luffy. However, the absolute emotional punch is that he's not doing this to rally the citizens and the people fighting. The whole reason he started this speech is because he saw what was happening with Doflamingo, Viola, and Rebecca. And as we hear his inner thoughts, he's buying time by putting his own life on the line to piss Doflamingo off enough for him to come after Gats instead of Viola and Rebecca. This guy is a real one. Like, what an incredibly selfless and brave act. Put his life on the line to do what he can with the skills that he has to save them. He's not a fighter, but he certainly can commentate and PA and drive up the hype and motivation. And he uses those skills masterfully here. And I also have to imagine that he must feel a little bit of responsibility, as he was always so gleefully promoting the Colosseum Games. And this was his way of probably somewhat atoning for his part in those, especially when it comes to Rebecca. Seeing him shaking in terror, knowing that he is intentionally trying to incur Doflamingo's wrath, is a really emotionally powerful moment. And this kind of calls back to what Sanji told Luffy. It's like, you may not have the strength to beat Doflamingo, but there are things that no one else can do. And he's certainly living up to that by doing what he can with the skills he has to try and help in any way he can. And I think that's really beautiful. I really love moments like this in One Piece because it proves to us, yeah, we may not all be superheroes or have great amount of power or resources, but there are things we can all still do to help in times of need. And this kind of shows that. But however, time is running out as Manchuri's dandelion elixir, temporarily, healing everybody, has begun to wear off, but their spirits haven't been broken yet. This sequence of events is so amazing and inspirational, and I love rereading this part because it's always so amazing to see like all these people coming together and helping and trying to fend off Doflamingo. Gats does manage to hold Doflamingo off long enough, but is stabbed after he's had enough of this, Gats's antics, and now turns his attention back to Viola and Rebecca. And the moment where Rebecca is forced to attack Viola is so freaking awesome and cathartic. Rebecca is in so much pain over the thought of having to kill her aunt, But just at the last moment, Viola is swapped out with a haki-coated Luffy, shattering Rebecca's sword. And I love this moment so much. Like, seeing the desperation and relief in Rebecca is so emotional, and the fact that Law is still part of the fight, helping Luffy out by using his shambles to make this save possible, is just the cherry on top. Like, this is the best way Oda could have utilized Law, making him still have a significant impact in the finale of the fight, while still making Luffy the main focus and hero. And to ultimately deal the final blow, but Law had to still play a role, considering this was his fight. It means so much more to him on a personal level to defeat Doflamingo. So I love that Oda still found a way to use Law in a significant way while still making Luffy sort of the main show. Now, before we get there, though, Luffy takes some massive hits from Doflamingo, weakening him to the point where he is able to get Parasite on him and actually control his body for the first time. And I often wonder what the conditions are that Doflamingo is able to use Parasite on someone. Like, I know the real answer is whatever suits Oda's story, but in world logic is kind of all over the place to me, it seems like, with this. Like, to me, like, it seems like such a powerful technique, but he doesn't seem to use it on his main opponents all that much. And I've always assumed that it had to do with haki, and that those with strong haki are able to resist it, or he's not even able to cast it on them to begin with. And like in the scene where he does ultimately control Luffy, he's already pretty much drained most of his haki, and it took 10 minutes to just get back in enough for him to stand up and fight again. And what gets him out of it is him going back into Gear 4th form for the last time, breaking all the Parasite strings. And Luffy flies up into the air and gives one of the more memorable speeches he's ever given in the series, summing up his entire philosophy and why Doflamingo especially is in front and pisses him off, because he's the antithesis to that philosophy. Luffy's ultimate dream is not to necessarily become the Pirate King. That is just a means to an end to his real goal of what becoming the Pirate King allows him to do, which is to be the freest person in the world, and for everyone else to enjoy that freedom as well. And having to deal with Doflamingo this entire time, controlling everything, it has been the most suffocating thing for him. And he says as much, it is iconic. It makes me feel like I'm suffocating. And that line is so good. I think this is so powerful because it's one of the rare instances where you can feel kind of the hatred Luffy has towards the villain. And what I mean by that is many of the villains, I don't think Luffy has actually hated. They were more obstacles in his way. They annoyed him for sure, and he was angry with them, but I don't know that he's actually hated many of them. But there are certain villains that Luffy feels and has shown sort of a heightened reaction towards because of they ideologically are an affront to Luffy's ideology of freedom for all. Like, think Arlong imprisoning Nami or Crocodile controlling Arabasta. I feel those are sort of the last few times that where you really saw this level of anger and frustration from Luffy directed towards the main villain. Like, even looking back to like Lucci, he didn't receive this despite him being one of the greatest enemies he's ever faced, because Lucci was merely a tool used by the world government, not the one actually perpetrating sort of the restricting of freedoms. So this moment has always remained significant because it's one of the rare and probably the greatest moment where Luffy actually voiced his frustration, not just with Doflamingo, but with the world government and how it operates. It's just a truly amazing moment. And yeah, this is it. Luffy's final attack on Doflamingo. He unleashes an attack called the Holy 16 Bullets God Thread, and Luffy uses an even bigger and stronger version of the Kong gun in the Gomu Gomu no King Kong gun. And I love how earlier we get this flashback of Luffy training on Ruskaina Island with Rayleigh after Luffy ran into an even bigger gorilla that he couldn't beat with the Kong gun, and Rayleigh offers him some advice that he's going to have to find another method to beating him because Gear 4th is so taxing. But the solution that Luffy comes up with isn't some new inventive way to beat him. Instead, his solution was to just punch even harder, which is kind of funny, not just for the fight, but also kind of a meta joke for the later on in the series. But one thing I absolutely hate that Toei did with the anime here in this final sort of clash is how they drag this attack out as if it's like a beam struggle from Dragon Ball Z. With all of Toei's best hits in terms of their bag of tricks to pad time, like extending moves out adding filler dialogue, cutting to every character's reaction. Like every single one of Toei's bag of tricks is utilized here, because in the manga, when I read this scene, the sense that I got was that it was a swift and decisive attack, which this absolutely was not. But at least they got the impact of Doflamingo's face just getting cratered by the punch. They got that part right, absolutely right, because like when his face just gets flattened and then he gets sent into the ground, that is still very satisfying. But it should have been that to begin with. It shouldn't have been this like long struggle. But yeah, this being set to law, remembering the prophetic words of Khorasan that the D clan are the natural enemies of the gods, it's from a visual storytelling standpoint is awesome. It's very simple, but the fact that Luffy goes above Doflamingo and smacks him back down to earth from the sky, proving to him that he isn't a god by his natural enemy, is so on point. Like, it's also a nice reversal of his victory over Crocodile in Arabasta, where the idea with his victory over Crocodile was to get him out of the underworld and expose him to the world by blasting him literally out of the ground and into the sky for everyone to see. And I love that sort of reverse parallel that they have from, again, with Dressrosa and Arabasta kind of mirroring each other in very interesting ways. And so, yeah, this was absolutely perfect. Now, is this truly the end of Doflamingo? Unfortunately, the episode cuts off before we actually get to see that. And yeah, Luffy has finally defeated him for the most part. But will the birdcage disappear? Unfortunately, because they wasted so much time in these episodes with padding filler, we don't actually get to see that in this episode. But we will definitely get into it on the next podcast. So we'll have to pause here for now. But if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. That would be really nice. And yeah, and check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast. I know I haven't really been updating. I'll try and get back on it soon. But yeah, as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. Just a tiny spoiler section, a couple things I wanted to mention. But if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. So I think the thing I wanted to kind of talk about in this spoiler section is the 16 Holy Bullets attack, because this has now become a very common theme, and I think this is the perfect time to kind of talk about it a little bit, because of how the number 16 seems to be a recurring significant number in One Piece, particularly when it comes to the Celestial Dragons. And sort of anybody holy, I guess you can say, like Emu and all that stuff. Because like you keep seeing 16, like for example, if you recall back to the flashback, when Doflamingo and Rocinante and Homing are strung up, and one of the villagers says that their son was shot 16 times by the Celestial Dragons, then obviously the 16 Holy Bullets. Also, when you go back to Enies Lobby, Luffy, he rang the bell 16 times to kind of challenge the world government. And then you have the other main significant one back when you go forward, when Lucia is wiped out by Uranus. And we see that if you count all the beams, there are 16 beams that shoot down from Uranus that Emu orders them to have destroyed Lucia. And then, yeah, you just keep seeing 16 over and over and over. And you kind of wonder, like, what does that actually mean? Now, there seems to be, like, several theories as to, like, what 16 could mean and why it's so important. A lot of it seems to be that the number 16 in sort of, like, numerology and in tarot, it represents sort of the changing of life, or like a major shift in nature. And so, yeah, it could signify the fact that, yeah, obviously we're in a time where things are changing, where the Celestial Dragons, their time is numbered, you know, their time is running out, and that eventually things will change. So by associating 16 with anything related to the Celestial Dragons and Emu, it seems like Oda is priming us or sort of foreshadowing that, yeah, things are going to change and that their downfall is near. I think that's what it kind of means. But yeah, it is interesting how often Oda uses number 16. I mean, Oda is actually very, I guess, cheeky with the way he uses numbers in general. Like, he has a lot of numbers that kind of show up over and over. But yeah, 16 is a pretty significant one that if you kind of pay attention, it keeps showing up throughout the story. But I always thought that was really interesting, especially I think where it really started to blow up in terms of significance is when people started counting the laser beams coming off of Uranus when Lucia was destroyed. It's like, there are 16 laser beams, and 16 seems to keep always coming up, especially when they look at this move, the holy 16 bullets. And yeah, it's very interesting to see that connection. The other thing I kind of wanted to mention was the punch harder thing. So it is funny thinking about it now that, like, you know, with the way Luffy kind of figured out how to defeat Doflamingo was to just punch harder and bigger. And I remember when Wano was coming to a close, and it was about like a year prior when Oda does his sort of like end of the year letters to the fan, and he mentions that he doesn't quite know how he's going to have Luffy beat Kaido because it seems like their power is so different at that point. And he was like, I don't think it'll be as satisfying if I just had him punch harder. And it's funny because in the end, Oda just makes Luffy punch harder by using the Bajron gun. And it's just an even bigger fist that just punches Kaido down into the ground. And I don't know if I'm like disappointed by the fact that his lack of creativity, but also very amused at the fact that he basically just has Luffy punch harder. It's a very interesting dynamic. But I always find that hilarious. That yeah, the last two major fights that he had between Doflamingo and Kaido, he just punches harder because, like, he doesn't defeat Big Mom obviously on Whole Cake Island. He just runs away from her. And Katakuri's, like, obviously that was a very different fight. And that was probably, again, that's probably one of the biggest and best fights, I think, in the series. But yeah, it is funny that the two biggest main villains, though, that Luffy has fought towards this point have all been just big punches. Yeah, and I do hope, like, Oda does come up with more creative ways. I mean, he's somehow sidestepped it so far, because, like, Egghead Island, you know, he again, that wasn't an arc where he actually defeats anyone. He ends up running away. So, like, Oda has somehow continued to sidestep this sort of problem of trying to find creative ways for Luffy to win. Because, I mean, at this point, it's like, what can you really do? Like, you know, I don't really blame Oda for running out of ways for Luffy to defeat an enemy, because, well, he can either punch them multiple times with things like, you know, Jet Gatling or Storm or, you know, Gatling or whatever. But at the end of the day, you can't really have many more ways of Luffy defeating his enemies. There have always been really blunt force attacks, whether that be bazooka, pistol, rifle, whatever, what have you. I mean, even his defeat of Enel was just a big punch. He just had a gold ball stuck to his arm, and that's what did it. But, so yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm complaining or if I'm criticizing. I don't think I really am, but yeah, it's just interesting how that kind of played out. But anyways, that's kind of all I really wanted to talk about. If you did enjoy this, yeah, hope you did anyways. See you on the next episode.